2 days after the water park visit, security guards found two bodies in a utility room. Bloody footprints trailed across the tiles toward the closed door, but there was no knife or other weapon nearby. Both women lay motionless, and the scene looked like a carefully concealed act of violence. In early July, two friends, 22-year-old Sarah Moore and 21-year-old Emily Carter, arrived at a popular water park in an American suburb. Both were students at a local college and decided to spend the day together, taking advantage of the weekend. They arrived at the parking lot around 11 a.m., bought tickets, and headed to the changing rooms. CCTV cameras captured them in the lobby, then near the pools with slides. During the first few hours, everything proceeded as usual. The girls rode the rides, took photos on their phones, and visited the on-site cafe. Water park employees recalled them as cheerful and sociable visitors. Several witnesses later reported seeing Sarah and Emily laughing, discussing their evening plans, and exchanging messages with friends. After lunch, they headed to the wave pool. Video footage captured the girls leaving their towels and bags on lounge chairs, entering the water, and spending about 20 minutes there. Nothing unusual appears during this segment of the footage. However, soon the cameras no longer capture them together. The final footage shows Sarah exiting the pool and heading toward the stairs leading to the closed technical area. Emily remains in the water, but a few minutes later also leaves the pool and heads in the same direction. The water park staff ignored the incident. That evening, when the facility closed, the girls' belongings were still on the lounge chairs. Security took them to the lost and found room, thinking the owners would pick them up later. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emily's friends began to worry. The girls weren't answering calls or texts. Their phones were either switched off or out of service. Later that night, relatives tried to contact them through friends and learned that the latter had only seen the girls that morning before going to the water park. Emily's mother then decided to call the police and report them missing. The report stated that the girls had not returned home, had not contacted anyone, and had left no notes. The police launched an investigation. Officers first visited the water park. Security confirmed that the girls' belongings were found at the end of the day, but they did not leave the premises through the main exit. Security footage showed that after the incident by the pool, the girls indeed headed toward the service areas, which were off-limits to visitors. CCTV did not record them further. This detail alerted investigators. The utility areas consisted of a network of corridors, warehouses, and utility rooms. Some of the cameras there were out of order due to renovations, and this fact later became key to the investigation. At that point, the search was limited to checking the surrounding area, the parking lot, and nearby streets. No trace of Sarah and Emily was found. The next day, police issued notices with photographs of the girls and asked anyone who might have seen them to come forward. They questioned water park staff, visitors, and nearby residents. However, this yielded no results. The girls apparently disappeared from the premises. Concern grew. The parents insisted on expanding the search, involving volunteers and the press. Missing persons notices appeared around the city, and television channels began covering the situation. But all this occurred alongside growing anxiety. Hours had passed since the disappearance, and every minute diminished the chances of a successful outcome. By the evening of the second day, the search continued without success. Only after water park staff decided to check the restricted areas did the situation change. It was there that security discovered traces indicating the girls had not left the facility alive. The morning of the second day began with new shifts of staff arriving at the water park. The place continued to operate as usual. The ticket office opened on time, families entered, and the rides filled with visitors. Only within the security department was tension lingering. Following the police visit the previous day, security had been ordered to conduct an additional inspection of the service areas. For many employees, this seemed like a formality, but the guards understood that a potential crime was at stake. Around midday, one of the security guards, patrolling the closed corridor behind the wave pool, noticed a strange stain on the floor. The tiles were damp, but a dark brown streak stretched downward. The tracks led to a metal door marked technical room. The guard called his partner, and together they decided to open the door. Behind the door was a small room where they stored equipment and chemicals for cleaning swimming pools. The smell of chlorine and humid air was so thick it immediately assaulted their senses. But what the guards saw next prompted them to immediately call the police. In a corner of the room lay two female bodies. Sarah and Emily were found on the floor, next to plastic containers and hoses. Their hair was matted and damp, their clothes were rumpled, and their skin bore marks of blows and scratches. Particularly striking were the bruises on their necks, which could have indicated strangulation. There were no knives or other sharp objects in the room. There were also no signs of a struggle in the usual sense. No furniture had been overturned, and no objects had been scattered. Security blocked the entrance to the utility corridor and called the police. The first officers arrived on the scene within 15 minutes. They secured the premises and began photographing evidence. They noted bloodstains on the tiles and shoe prints, which experts suspected belonged to at least two different people besides the victims. Forensic lab specialists arrived at the water park in the evening. The girls' bodies were carefully removed in special bags and sent to the morgue for forensic examination. At the scene, they collected fluid samples from the floor, stained fabric fragments, and fingerprint from the door handles. Police thoroughly interviewed staff members, attempting to reconstruct the timeline of events. Special attention was paid to the surveillance cameras. After reviewing the footage, investigators confirmed that the girls had indeed headed toward the service areas and then disappeared from view. The cameras in the maintenance corridor were not working at the time. It was determined that the malfunction had been ongoing for several weeks, and water park management had been delaying repairs. This circumstance was one of the reasons the crime remained hidden for so long. News of the discovery of the bodies quickly spread through the media. Reporters gathered at the water park gates, and footage from the scene was shown on leading television channels. The girls' parents were notified by the police and taken to the station for official confirmation of their identities. The scene sparked a widespread public outcry, with residents demanding an explanation from authorities as to why security at the entertainment facility had been so vulnerably compromised. Throughout the day, police questioned dozens of witnesses. Some visitors recalled hearing screams coming from the service areas but dismissed them, thinking they were normal work noises. Others claimed to have seen an employee near the technical area at the time the girls disappeared. His name was added to a list of potential witnesses. Meanwhile, experts thoroughly examined the crime scene. They noted that the premises were locked with a standard lock, the key to which was only available to maintenance workers and security guards. No signs of forced entry were found on the doors, indicating that the perpetrator was either an employee or had access to the keys. The next day, police presented a preliminary report. According to their findings, the girls' deaths occurred approximately 24 hours before their bodies were discovered. This meant they were already dead when the search began. The official cause of death had not yet been determined, but experts were inclined to believe strangulation was the method used, likely using improvised means, a belt, rope, or even hands. The murder weapon was never found. There were no objects in the room that could be definitively linked to the crime. The absence of a weapon complicated the investigation, but also indicated that the killer had carefully planned his actions. He left minimal traces, limiting investigators' chances of quickly tracking him down. The discovery of the bodies was a turning point. It evolved from a missing persons case into a double homicide investigation. Access to the water park was restricted, and some rides were temporarily closed. Management pledged full cooperation with the police, but this left unanswered questions. How were the two young women able to gain unimpeded access to the service areas, and why no one noticed their absence sooner? The police continued their work. Priorities included establishing the exact cause of death, DNA and fingerprint analysis, and verifying the officers' alibis. A new phase of the investigation began, aimed at answering the key question: who committed the murder and why, in a place where hundreds of people had come for entertainment and safe recreation. The bodies of Sarah Moore and Emily Carter were delivered to the county morgue that evening. Forensic experts were tasked with determining the cause of death as quickly as possible, as it would determine the direction of the investigation. From the very beginning, it became clear that the case would not be straightforward. During a physical examination, doctors noted numerous bruises on the arms and legs, which could have been caused by a struggle or restraint. Both girls had visible scratches and abrasions on their skin, likely caused by contact with a hard surface of the floor or walls. The most disturbing sign was the marks on their necks, characteristic streaks indicating strangulation. However, the instrument used to inflict the injuries was never found. The autopsy confirmed preliminary findings. Both victims showed signs of asphyxia, a lack of oxygen. Their lungs were filled with blood and fluid, and petechial hemorrhages were found in the respiratory tract. All of this indicated that the girls died from strangulation. However, the experts were unable to determine with certainty whether a belt, rope, or hands were used. The injuries were blurred and had no clear pattern. Additional tests revealed no traces of alcohol or drugs in the victim's blood. This ruled out voluntary substance use, which could have influenced their behavior and made them more vulnerable. Experts also examined the possibility of exposure to chemicals stored in the water park where the bodies were found. However, the concentration of chlorine and other chemicals in the blood and tissues did not exceed normal levels, meaning poisoning was not the cause of death. Microfibers of fabric that didn't match their clothing were found on the girl's skin. Experts hypothesized that these traces could have come from the material used by the killer to strangle them. The fabric resembled a thick synthetic material, similar to a seat belt or industrial belt. This finding became one of the first concrete leads in the investigation. Particular attention was paid to the time of death. Forensic experts concluded that Sarah and Emily died approximately 24 to 30 hours before their bodies were discovered. This meant that the girls were already dead when the active search began and the wanted posters were issued. This fact caused a significant public outcry and fueled criticism of the police for their failure to promptly locate the victims within the water park. The examination also examined the possibility of sexual assault. Biological samples were taken for this purpose. Initial results revealed no signs of such a crime, but further DNA testing was required to reach a definitive conclusion. It was later determined that genetic traces were indeed present at the scene, but their attribution to specific individuals remained to be established. Forensic scientists, working alongside forensic experts, examined the seized evidence: bloodstains, fluid samples, and fingerprints. Several partial prints were recovered from the door handle and containers in the room. These were entered into a national database for comparison. Results were expected in the coming weeks. A significant discovery was that the girls' clothing contained traces of dust and dirt, uncharacteristic of a water park. Experts hypothesized that they may have been held in another room and then transferred to the chemical room. This theory opened a new line of investigation. Perhaps the location where the bodies were found was not the actual murder scene, but merely used to cover up the crime. The official forensic report was presented to police a few days later. It stated that both girls died as a result of mechanical asphyxia. No direct chemical threat was found, nor were there any signs of sexual assault. However, the report emphasized the presence of signs of a struggle, indicating that the victims attempted to resist. The police received important clues. The death occurred during the period when the girls were already considered missing. Most likely, the killer used improvised means rather than a weapon. Only a limited number of people had access to the premises. It is possible that the location where the bodies were found is secondary. These findings set the direction for further investigation. The main task now was to identify the circle of people who had keys or access to the water park's technical facilities and to correlate this with the time of Sarah and Emily's disappearance. After receiving the forensic report, the investigation focused on identifying suspects. The primary goal was to determine who had access to the water park's technical facilities on the day the girls disappeared. The facility's management provided a list of employees. It listed about 20 people: security guards, cleaners, maintenance workers, and managers. Each had keys or electronic cards allowing access to service areas. Police began checking the alibis of all employees. The security guard were questioned first. One of them admitted to seeing a girl resembling Sarah in the hallway with the door closed that evening. He assumed she was simply lost and ignored her. Another security guard claimed to have heard noises outside the utility room, but didn't investigate because he was busy escorting visitors. These testimonies indicated that the victims could have been in danger even then, and that a timely response by the staff could have made a difference. The maintenance workers were then questioned. One of them, 34-year-old Thomas Reed, attracted particular attention from investigators. Traces of a substance similar in composition to the particles found on the girl's clothing were found on his uniform. Reed claimed it was dust residue from the utility rooms, but experts didn't rule out the possibility that the match could be a significant clue. Furthermore, his work schedule coincided with the time of Sarah and Emily's disappearance. Investigators also looked at temporary surveillance footage. Footage taken an hour before the water park closed showed a man in uniform exiting a corridor leading to utility rooms. His face was not visible, but his height and build matched Reed's. In addition to employees, visitors were also checked. Several witnesses reported seeing an unknown man attempting to enter the service area, pretending to speak with staff. However, cameras did not capture this incident, and the witnesses' descriptions were vague. At the same time, lab experts reported that partial fingerprints found on containers in the room containing the bodies did not match a database of previously convicted individuals. This meant that the perpetrator likely had not previously come to police attention. Several versions were considered. The murder could have been committed by a water park employee using official access. The victims could have been lured into utility rooms by outsiders with the assistance or negligence of workers. The location where the bodies were found could have been chosen in advance to cover up the traces. The investigation was faced with a lack of direct evidence. The murder weapon was not found. DNA evidence was partial and required time to analyze, and surveillance cameras provided no clear picture. Despite this, police continued to question and investigate everyone who was at the water park on the day of the girl's disappearance. As a result, the investigation took on a large-scale scope. Media articles appeared alleging the possible involvement of facility employees, and the water park's management was criticized for faulty cameras and lax access controls. The public demanded a swift resolution to the case, and investigators understood that at stake was not only justice for the victims' families, but also public trust in the security system. Several months after the tragedy, the police completed their investigation and handed over the materials to the prosecutor's office. The main defendant was Thomas Reed, a maintenance worker at the water park. His evidence was circumstantial but consistent. Coincidences in timing, dust marks on his uniform, and security camera footage showing a figure similar to his height and build. The prosecution's key argument was the results of DNA testing. Partial traces found on the clothing of one of the victims matched Reed's genetic material. The trial began with a flurry of media interest. Sarah and Emily's relatives, journalists, and members of the public were present. Prosecutors argued that Reed had used his access to the office premises to lure the girls into a back room, where he committed the murder. The defense argued that the evidence was inconclusive and that DNA traces could have been accidentally deposited on their clothing, given his daily work in the same premises. Experts testified at the hearing. Forensic experts detailed the cause of death: mechanical asphyxia. They confirmed that there were marks of force on the victims' necks, but the specific object used could not be identified. Forensic experts noted that the fingerprints on the containers did not belong to the defendant, but a DNA match and the time frame in which he was present in the area strengthened the prosecution's case. Witness testimony also played a role. One of the guards claimed to have seen Reed near the hallway shortly after the girl's disappearance. Although he couldn't say for certain that he was in the crime scene, his words heightened suspicion. The defense insisted that the investigation failed to thoroughly investigate other potential suspects and focused too quickly on one individual. The lawyers pointed out that security cameras did not record the girls entering or leaving with Reed, and no direct evidence, a weapon or clear fingerprints, was found. After several weeks of hearings, the jury retired to consider its verdict. Deliberations were lengthy, as the contradictory evidence raised doubts. However, in the end, the jury found Thomas Reed guilty of double murder. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. The verdict provoked mixed reactions. The victim's family said they felt at least some sense of justice, but many observers continue to doubt Reed's absolute guilt. Public debate centered on security issues at such facilities and the need for strict access control to service areas. The case ended with an official verdict, but some questions remained unanswered. The exact murder weapon was never found, and the theory that the location where the bodies were found could have been merely a hiding place was not conclusively confirmed. Nevertheless, the court found the evidence sufficient for a guilty verdict, and the case became one of the most high-profile in the region in recent years. The investigation concluded with the conviction of technical staff member Thomas Reed. The court found that Sarah Moore and Emily Carter died from strangulation. The sentence was life imprisonment without parole. The case became a symbol of the vulnerability of public safety.